wonderful group, Vermont Works for Women, whose executive director, Jennifer Oldham, will lead this in-conversation event. And after tonight's event, there'll be time for a few questions before we move downstairs where the books are available for purchase and signing. Please take this moment to silence your cell phone, particularly tonight because the Vermont Works for Women group will be live streaming it on their Facebook page. Maid is a staggering memoir. Stephanie Land struggled through poverty as a single mom. She found a job as a house cleaner and barely survived on a salary. But this amazing book isn't just about her. This timely book explores the great challenge in our country today, the extreme economic disparity. She was one of the faceless workers who are out of sight except to those who look, anonymous to those she worked for. A reviewer in The Guardian has said, "People such as Land are perhaps the biggest threat to the myth of the American dream. Someone who worked hard, yet found her very country pitted against her success. Her new book is both a memoir of her time working as a cleaner in middle-class households and a dismantling of the lies the U.S. tells itself about the poor, namely that they don't work." Jennifer Oldham has spent her career working to improve socioeconomic opportunities of vulnerable populations, both in the U.S. and overseas. The mission of Vermont Works for Women is to help women and girls recognize their potential and explore, pursue, and excel in work that leads to economic independence. In October of last year, this organization received a $350,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Labor Women's Bureau to expand women's access to training, apprenticeships, and jobs in the electrical, plumbing, and construction fields. Senator Patrick Leahy, in congratulating them, said, "Women who have been denied the same opportunities to earn good wages and benefits that are more readily available to men. While we know there is still much work to be done, this grant moves us closer to the goal of equal opportunity, regardless of gender." Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Oldham and Stephanie Land.
Thank you, David.
Of course.
I'm Jennifer, by the way. So we were just chatting about, and actually Stephanie was giving me some advice because she's been doing this more than I have, about the best way to really sort of get into the book and into the key topics. And I think we're going to start with Stephanie reading a passage, and then I'll just say a little bit more about Vermont Works for Women, but I think that what she's going to read really lays the foundation for the discussion.
That mic is taking me out. Okay, I was thinking I was going to have to lean over. So it's been working out pretty well for me to say a few things about the book, assuming that some people in the audience haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. So explain a little bit about why it's important to me that you're all here, and how great it is that you all showed up. And I just wanted to thank the Northshire bookstore for having me. It means so much to be up in this area. Otherwise I wouldn't have come up here probably ever. So it's a beautiful country you have up here, and very close to home for me. I grew up in Alaska, so it's kind of nice to see some snow and mountains. So 10 years ago, I had just escaped an abusive relationship and moved with my then 9-month-old daughter Mia into a homeless shelter. I had $200 in my pocket and about the same amount in food stamps, and a family who couldn't help me. As a single mother, I needed a job that I could do when my daughter was at daycare. Evening and weekend work was not an option. Without office skills or a college degree, and in the height of a recession-era job market, cleaning houses rose to the surface as the only job that I could do. I worked through illnesses and brought my daughter to daycare when she was sick and should have been at home with me. There was no sick pay, no vacation days, no foreseeable increase in wage, and yet I begged to work more. Wages lost from missed work hours could rarely be made up, and if I missed too many, I risked being fired. I relied on government assistance to survive. Childcare grants and food stamps made it possible to use my limited income for essentials like rent, utilities, and clothing. There were days in the month before the food stamp money replenished in my account that I went to bed hungry or ate very little. After paying bills, I often had no more than $20 left in the month for things like toiletries and even tampons. Any unexpected expense, a flat tire or a medical bill, could send us teetering towards homelessness again. No matter how hard I worked, it never felt like it was enough, or even that I was enough. We lived and we survived in that careful imbalance. This was my unwitnessed existence, as I polished another's to make theirs appear perfect. This is the reality for millions of workers in America, struggling to survive on a minimum wage. There is a myth that if you work hard and pull yourself out by the bootstraps, you'll make it in this country. But the math just doesn't add up when minimum wage is $15 or less, and estimates say a single parent would need to make at least $30 an hour to make ends meet. For those who turn to government for support, there is often an air of mistrust and judgment. The stigma surrounding food stamps is that those people don't work or don't work hard enough. But in applying for government assistance, I had to not only constantly prove that I was working, but that I wasn't squirreling away money somewhere or driving a nice vehicle. My total assets were not allowed to be more than a few $1,000s. Even a 50-cent pay increase could mean I'd no longer qualify for hundreds in benefits. No longer be able to feed my child. The aid application process alone seemed designed to discourage people from even trying. Paperwork was often dozens of pages thick and required access to a computer or a printer. Little things, like mandatory appointments with caseworkers during the middle of the workday, could present an impossible hurdle. So I've known that I've wanted to be a writer since I was 10 years old. For almost a decade, I scraped by as I worked my way through college in pursuit of that dream. But every time my car broke down or I lost a day of work, I felt incredibly guilty for pursuing an education, especially an art degree. I felt like our life didn't afford me this notion of being a writer, and the government did not really support it either. If someone wants to learn skills or get an education, the hours they spend in class do not count toward the required work benefits for food stamps. So as a full-time student with a child over 6 years old, I was denied food benefits. I was punished for bettering myself and my ability to support my daughter. The truth is that for those living in the margins, working day and night to survive, there is often no real path out of poverty. The obstacles are simply too great, the system too broken. But I hope this book changes the stigmas that surround single mothers, especially those living in poverty. The stigmas that say we somehow deserve hardship because of horrible decisions we made to get us here. I hope people see how hard we work to make ends meet and how fiercely we love our kids. How much we struggle to be enough while the government scolds us, telling us we're becoming dependent on things they call handouts and we call means to survive. I hope that even though it's just me up here today in front of you, that through reading my story, you start to see the millions of other single parents, domestic workers, and those who are working so hard just to get by. The invisible housekeepers you brush by on your way out of a hotel. The restaurant workers who take the early morning shift to clean and polish before the doors open. The countless people who clean up after us every day. I hope those who read my story recognize all of the other stories that also need to be told. So I'm going to read part of that story right now. I've been referring to this as the angry chapter. Barbara Ehrenreich told me, don't be afraid to get angry, and so I tried. This chapter is called Donna's House. Over the summer, the idea of drug tests for welfare recipients had some new life breathed into it. Since the recession, millions had turned to the government for help. More struggling middle-class taxpayers voicing their anger over the injustice of others getting a handout caused tension between folks already on government assistance, using their food stamps, and those who didn't qualify. Demanding drug tests perpetuated a new layer of judgment for those of us receiving the assistance, creating a new narrative of how we took advantage, took money from the government in our laziness, and now possibly addiction. Memes online compared people on food stamps to wild animals. One meme showed a bear sitting at a picnic table and read, "Today's lesson in irony. The food stamp program, a part of the Department of Agriculture, is pleased to be distributing the greatest amount of food stamps ever. Meanwhile, the Park Service, which is also part of the Department of Agriculture, asks us to please do not feed the animals because the animals may grow dependent and not learn to take care of themselves." Another popular one had an illustrated work booth that read, "If I had to take a drug test to work, you should have to take one for welfare." Another one said, "If you can afford drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes, then you don't need food stamps." One of my friends on Facebook worked at a grocery store, and she had started to post what people bought on food stamps to make fun of them. Funyuns on food stamps with soda? She encouraged her friends to make fun of what poor people could barely afford to eat. Around 40 million families were signed up for government assistance along with me that year. EBT cards distributed by the Department of Health and Human Services to utilize food stamps or cash assistance were a common sight at cash registers. Take and bake pizza shops now accepted EBT cards, but I rarely used my allotment of food stamps for that. Mount Vernon, Skagit County's largest city at 33,000 people, became home to a large population of migrant workers through the growing season, and many of those families decided to stay year-round. But as the migrant population increased, the conservatism of the area was exposed. Donna seemed to have a lot of grievances about this. I'd come to depend heavily on the $20 an hour with a $10 tip she always left for me. But driving back and forth to her house would steal an hour from my workday. One day she was on her way out to the store when I arrived to purchase ingredients for smoothies, since she just bought a special new blender. "It's for a new me," she cried. "I'm gonna go to the co-op this time. I don't like big grocery stores anymore." "Oh, really?" I asked, feigning interest. Donna enjoyed Mary Kay oils, which left a film that stuck to the side of her bathtub like Velcro, collecting every hair, every dead skin cell that came off of her. It was hard to have conversations with her without seeing flashes of it. I never knew if she expected me to stop and talk or continue cleaning while having a conversation with the person whose pubic hairs and leg hair stubble I'd have to scrub from the rain of her jetted tub. "Last time I went to the store, I got in line behind a Mexican family," she said. "They used food stamps to pay for their food, and those kids were dressed to the nines." I continued to dust a windowsill in her front sitting room, full of little angel statues with their hands together in prayer. Her words were sharp. I bit down on the tip of my tongue. I thought of how much Mia loved her fancy dresses and shiny shoes that I purchased with credit from the consignment store. Maybe Donna didn't realize that I was on food stamps too. I wanted to tell Donna that it wasn't her business what a family bought or ate or wore, and that I hated when cashiers at the supermarket said, "On your EBT," loud enough for people in line behind me to hear. I wanted to tell her that undocumented people couldn't receive food benefits or tax refunds, even though they paid taxes. They couldn't receive any government benefits at all. Those were available only for people who were born here or who had obtained the documents to stay. So those children, those parents whose parents had risked so much to give them a good life, were citizens who deserved every bit as much government help as my daughter did. I knew this because I'd sat with them in countless government offices. I overheard their conversations with caseworkers sitting behind glass, failing to communicate through a language barrier. But these attitudes that immigrants came here to steal our resources were spreading, and the stigmas resembled those facing anyone who relied on government assistance to survive. Anyone who used food stamps didn't work hard enough or made bad decisions to put them in that low-class place. It was like people thought it was on purpose and that we cheated the system, stealing the money they paid toward taxes to rob the government of funds. More than ever, it seemed, taxpayers, including my client, thought their money subsidized food for lazy poor people. Donna left for the grocery store, oblivious to my emotional reaction to her words. Grocery shopping made me feel twice as vulnerable after that. With the added posts on social media, I was certain that people watched my every move. I worried about buying items that were either too nice or too frivolous. In the chances that I would ever need to get Easter candy or chocolate for Mia's stocking at Christmas with food stamp money, I'd go late at night and use the self-checkout. Even though I really needed it, I stopped using WIC benefits for milk, cheese, eggs, and peanut butter. I never seemed to get the right size, brand, or color of eggs, the correct type of juice, or the specific number of ounces of cereal anyway. Each coupon had such specific requirements that in what it could be used for, and I held my breath when the cashier rang them up. I always screwed up in some way and caused a holdup in the line. Maybe others did the same, since cashiers grew visibly annoyed whenever they saw one of those large coupons on the conveyor belt. Once, after massive amounts of miscommunication with the cashier, an older couple started huffing and shaking their heads behind me. My caseworker at the WIC office had even tried to prepare me for it. The program had recently downgraded their qualifying milk from organic to non-organic, leaving me with a missing chunk in my food budget I couldn't afford to make up. If at all possible, I tried to give my daughter only organic whole milk. Non-organic 2% milk might as well have been white-colored water to me, packed with salt, sugar, antibiotics, and hormones. Those coupons were my last chance for a while to offer her one organic food that she ingested. When I'd scoffed at losing the benefit to purchase organic whole milk, my caseworker nodded and sighed. "We just don't have the funding anymore," she told me. I somewhat understood, since a half gallon had a price tag of nearly $4. "The obesity rates are going up in children," she added, "and this is a program focused on providing the best nutrition." "They don't realize that skim milk is full of sugar?" I asked, allowing Mia to climb from my lap so she could play with some toys in the corner. "They're also adding $10 for produce," she added brightly. Ignoring my grumpy attitude, "You can purchase any produce you want except potatoes." "Why not potatoes?" I thought of the large batches of mashed potatoes I made to supplement my diet. "People tend to fry them or add lots of butter," she said, looking a little confused herself. "But you can get sweet potatoes." She explained I'd have to purchase exactly $10 worth or less and wouldn't be able to go over or the check wouldn't work. I wouldn't get any change if the produce I selected rang in under $10. The coupons didn't have any real monetary value. That day at the store, with it being the last month of organic milk, I wanted every bit I could get. "Your milk isn't a WIC item," the cashier said again. "It won't ring up that way." She started to turn to the young man bagging our groceries and sighed. I knew she was going to tell him to run and get the right kind of milk. It happened to me with the eggs all the time. My checks weren't expired, but the store had already updated their system. Normally, I would have cowered, taken the non-organic milk, and run out, especially with two old people shaking their heads in annoyance. I glanced at them again and caught the man standing with his arms crossed and head tilted, eyeing my pants with holes in the knees. My shoes were getting holes in the toes. He loudly sighed again. I asked to speak to the manager. The cashier's eyebrows shot up and she shrugged her shoulders and put up her hands in front of her like I'd pulled out a gun and ordered her to give me all of her money. "Sure," she said, evenly and coolly, the voice of a customer service representative faced with an unruly shopper. "I'll get the manager for you." As he walked over, I could see his flustered employee following behind him, red-faced and gesturing wildly, even pointing at me to explain her side of the story. He immediately apologized and overrode the cash register. Then he rang up my organic whole milk as a WIC item, bagged it, and told me to have a wonderful day. As I pushed my cart away, my hands still shaking, the old man nodded towards my groceries and said, "You're welcome." I grew infuriated. "You're welcome for what?" I wanted to yell. That he'd waited so impatiently, huffing and grumbling to his wife? It couldn't have been that. It was that I was obviously poor, and shopping in the middle of the day, pointedly not at work. He didn't know I had to take an afternoon off for that WIC appointment, missing $40 in wages, where they had to weigh both Mia and me. We left with a booklet of coupons that supplemented about the same as those lost wages, but not the disgruntled client who might have to reschedule, who might, if I ever needed to reschedule again, go with a different cleaner because my work was that disposable. But what he saw was that those coupons were paid for by government money, the money that he personally contributed to with the taxes that he paid. To him, he might as well have personally bought the fancy milk I insisted on, but I was obviously poor, so I didn't deserve it. Would my clients like Donna, the ones who confided in me like a good friend, who gave me coloring books and crayons for Mia, do the same if they saw me at the grocery store? How would they view a cleaning lady on food stamps? As a hard worker or a failure? I'd become so self-conscious about these things that I tried to hide the details as much as possible. In the middle of conversations, I'd wonder if the person's view would change of me if they knew that I was on food stamps. Would they assume I had less potential? I found myself wondering what it would be like to have enough money to be able to hire someone to clean my house. I'd never been in that position before, and honestly doubted I ever would be. If I ever had to, I thought, I'd give them a really big tip, and probably offer them food, or give them good smelling candles or little gifts. I treat them like a guest, not a ghost, an equal, like a few of my clients did for me. Thank you. Just a few more things to say, and then we can open it up to questions. So even though Maid is about the gritty work of cleaning houses and struggling to survive, to me it has always been about a mother wanting what's best for her child, to be able to feed her child and give her the love that she deserved, regardless of whether or not her dinner was purchased with food stamps. After I finished writing Maid, Mia, who's 11 and a half now, we went out to celebrate. And we started by getting our hair cut, and the hairdresser is a friend of mine, and she kind of stepped back and exclaimed, "Just think of all the work you've put into this. You've basically been writing this book since Mia was born." Afterward, Mia and I were walking down the street to a restaurant for dinner, and she leaned over and asked me, "Is that why my middle name is Story, Mom?" "Because you were writing a book about me?" And I said, "No, your middle name is Story because your dad didn't want that to be your first name." Which, now that I think about it, was probably good because you would have had the name Storyland. But Mia's middle name actually came from a quote that I saw in the John Steinbeck Museum right after I found out that I was pregnant. I'd driven down the coast to pick up her dad, who'd just ridden his bike from northern Washington to California. And being the John Steinbeck fan that I am, I had to go to the museum on Cannery Row in Monterey. As you're leaving, there's a quote painted on the wall that says, "If the story is not about the hearer, he will not listen. And here I make a rule. A great and interesting story is about everyone, or it will not last." And so I stared at those words and put my hand where this thing the size of a lentil barely had a heartbeat. And even though things felt so uncertain, I was reassured that I had started an exceptional journey. That motherhood wasn't something I had to bear alone. We would become part of a much bigger story. And I am humbled and beyond grateful to see so many of you show up tonight, and that my story is being told, not only being told, but being listened to. That everyone showed up and they continue to show up. So thank you for that. It warms my heart. It makes all of this worth it. I personally no longer live on $6 an hour. My story has a happy ending that way, but there are so many stories that don't. I am honored to be here and put a different face on poverty, and to be a voice for a population of people who too often go unheard. I hope that this is the part of my story and the part of our story that lasts. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story in such a raw way. I think that's something that humbles me, and I have had the opportunity to read the book, and you did kind of want to get through it because you wanted to know where the story went, and I know your story's still going on, so I look forward to more. In reading the book, I think what I really felt were two things. One, that you do speak about universal truths for all of us, which is about the impact of loneliness and lack of connection, the need for community, and that it doesn't matter if you have a big house or a small house. And then, as you said, what poverty is and what people don't understand about poverty. And at Vermont Works for Women, our goal is to help women achieve financial stability, economic independence, and we have a lot of different types of programs, but one of them is working with women who are trying to get back in the workforce and managing many of the things you talk about having to prove how poor you are that you can get food stamps, and having to take time out of the job you actually got to be there. And just for context, here in Vermont, 40% of single-headed households in Vermont live in poverty. This is not just a few isolated neighborhoods, and single female-headed households are the biggest group of Vermonters living in poverty. And half of women in Vermont work in sectors where the median salary is $35,000 a year, which is not enough to support a family if you're a single-headed household. So this is not a story of a young woman from Montana now. It's a story of people living around us, and I think you are shedding light for the country, and I think for many, many Vermonters as well. So I guess I'll start with the question, which is, as a writer, and having a goal for a writer, did you think that you would be writing about social and economic justice? Is that where you thought your path would take you?
No. Well, I didn't think that I would have any experience going hungry. That was a little shocking to me. But what happened, this book came out of an article that had gone viral. And it went so viral that I was getting 20 to 50 messages through my website a day. And besides all of the ones that were full of very hateful things, there were a few that came out and said, "Thank you for telling my story, and thank you for putting light on being a domestic worker and working for so little pay." And so from that, I started working with the program, Barbara Ehrenreich's program, the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, and also started working with the Center for Community Change. And they saw the power of a personal narrative from a person in poverty. We so often hear people talking about poverty, and they have never experienced it themselves. There's a lot of successful people writing about poor people, and it's not very often that we hear from poor people themselves, because who has time to sit down and write, or who can afford it? And so I was mentored and given a stipend, and taught how to be a journalist, because I had an English degree, and so I, learned how to place articles, learned how to pitch editors, and from that, one of my first articles that I placed was with The Guardian, and I remember standing on a street corner, walking through downtown Missoula, and answered my flip phone, because I, of course, couldn't afford a smartphone, and she said, "The Guardian just called me, they really want an article from you," and I couldn't believe it, but that happened over and over again, and I found a niche that was necessary and really needed to be filled, so. And it's been almost 4 years now, so, maybe 5, it's been a while, that I've been a freelancer, and that's my normal day job. So, but it's been a crazy ride.
Wow. Are you still writing articles as well, or are you sort of dedicated to your book now?
Yeah, this is my more than full-time job right now.
I bet.
So, but I plan to get back into it. I have to. I'm addicted to the drama, and I enjoy getting angry and writing about it.
So one of the statistics I've heard is that when you live in poverty, it takes 7 times as long to get something accomplished as if you're someone who has the resources. So for example, doing your laundry. What it looks like when you're home and the laundry is right there and you put it in and then you do other things versus, I'm wondering if you can sort of explain to us what that looks like on a, when you're in that situation.
Yeah, my laundromat was like 30 minutes away because it was like always empty on a Saturday, which is rare. So I always went to that one, even though it cost a lot in gas and would have to take Mia with me. And but I had to wash my work rags for work and pay for that myself. And so that's one example. Another one, there was no way that I could buy in bulk. I bought groceries in very, very small quantities. Not only because, you know, I only had $200 a month total, but my living space was so small that I couldn't store any other food, even if I could buy in bulk. And I was lucky that I had a car that worked most of the time, but for a lot of people that's not a possibility either. So it's taking the bus with all your groceries, or you know, and you can only afford to buy the small package of toilet paper, which costs more, but that's all you can afford, and so that means just a lot more work. It's expensive to be poor in that way.
And the idea that if you make too much, you could lose more in benefits than you get in a raise. And you know, one of the things we witness is that people are smart. They can calculate, no, I don't want to raise because then I lose that. And that's not because you don't want to work harder. It's not that you don't want to make more money. It's that this is the way the system works. And you talk about that in the book as well.
Yeah, jumping off the welfare cliff is really scary. I did it 4 years ago, maybe, 3 years ago, and just out of reluctance and tiredness, and I couldn't apply again. And I was like barely on the edge. I knew it was going to be hard, and there were weeks that I was extremely hungry and did not have enough food, but my job was picking up enough that the leaner months of freelancing, I could make it through it. But yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about losing your child care subsidy if you work too much, or losing, you know, housing subsidies. That wasn't maybe a part of your experience, but the benefit of every decision, you know, the cost benefit of every decision around working.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time that my wages went up by $50, and that meant that I would now have a $50 copay for childcare. So, you know, what's the use in working harder if, you know, it just literally goes right out the door as soon as you get it, so.
Yeah. So I'm gonna open it up to questions from the audience, and then I'll, you know, maybe throw some in, but I think there's richness in people's questions out there. So, anyone have a question?
I can tell you I know just what you're talking about. And for a while, they thought that I could work 15 hours, but they weren't taking into consideration I was on Social Security.
Can you speak up a little?
So I lost everything that I had, you know, food allotment, medical, for a year. It was hell to try to get it all back. And I had to cut my hours. I only work 10 hours now to be on the safe side. And, you know, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. But, you know, I do what I have to do. And then, of course, every year, or now it's less than a year, that you have to, you know, they have to review you again. So I have to fill out the same form every year with the same information. And I am always petrified, because if you step over one, you know, like I forgot, I sent them, just recently, I sent them the, you know, the amount that I was making for the whole month where I work. And I was supposed to send the papers, you know, the direct deposit slips, and so that was another whole, they waste more money in the government, you know, mailing this and mailing that, it's just unbelievable. So I am, you know, I shook my head in a lot of places that you were reading, because it's really true. So thanks, it was delightful to hear you.
Oh, thank you. Did you have a question? Or
No.
no? Well, that was just as valuable. Thank you.
We've talked a lot about what is wrong with the system and what's not working. Were there any pieces of the system that you think do work and that we should be doing more of?
Well, the question is there anything in the government assistance system that does work and that we should do more of? I can't say that any of it is really working in the way that it should be, because I think the system is just so designed to hold you back and does not encourage you to better yourself at all. The thing that helped me the most, though, and that I would love to see more resources and money dumped into on all sides of it, is childcare. There's a system involved with that where you have to have a job first before you can apply, and you have to be able to prove that you're working. Then where's your kid while you're filling out the application process, which can take a couple of weeks. And then not only that, not all daycare centers will take that grant, and they're not the best, because the government grant doesn't pay very much. It doesn't pay the total amount that the daycare center charges. And there's a lot of regulations and a lot of paperwork that they have to fill out. They're basically doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And so I always felt like I needed to tour every place, and it was a lot of work finding childcare, just because of all of those things involved. And it's hard to drop your kid off at a place where you know the workers are getting paid so little that they can't even afford to take their own kids there. And, you know, they're exhausted, and I can see it in them. And it's heartbreaking in all areas. But I was absolutely desperate for daycare constantly, and childcare, and the fact that I could only find a job during daycare hours was really difficult, because a lot of those are professional jobs that require a degree or a certain amount of experience, or it's not an entry-level position by any means. So that was my main struggle, that I just feel like we can get behind taking care of kids and the people who take care of our kids. You know, we don't even have universal health care for children, and that just makes no sense for me either. So those two things would benefit people who are struggling greatly. And I mean, can you even imagine having universal childcare? Like, I mean, I'm paying at least $1,000 a month between babysitters normally, and then book tours just like killing me. So it's an expensive endeavor. It's almost as much as college tuition in some places or more. There's so much need for that, and I don't even hear it talked about at all.
I think we talk about it more and more in the state, and it's crosses the legislature. There are bills in the legislature to address it that haven't moved yet. You know, as you think about women in general, we know that women bear most of the burden, the childcare burden in families, and that childcare and the lack of childcare is one of the things that keeps women, regardless of where they are on the economic sphere, from advancing, and is really one of the main reasons for the wage gap that we talk about, is lack of childcare and what happens when you leave the workforce to care for your children, or you can't get back in the workforce. And you're exactly right. What is available doesn't cover the costs for the childcare providers, which leaves them also then, who are also mostly women, economically disadvantaged. Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to ask you how you felt being on this book tour and coming here to Vermont just when this whole government shutdown debacle was happening, and how you felt if you were listening to so many of those stories, which were heartrending and exposed a lot of this kind of thing. And also, if it struck you, I know it certainly struck me, that we don't take enough ownership of our systems and how they work. It's like there's that schism there for that. And if we don't stop stigmatizing poverty and like take ownership of our systems and how they really work. And there was so much in the stories that would come over media from people in tears, during the shutdown about that. So I wanted to know, like, your feeling about just the kismet of all of that while you were on this tour with, your wonderful book, which is exposing and helping to rip the scab off this kind of thing.
Yeah, I felt a little encouraged by hearing all those stories. I think struggling to get by is shameful for people, because we're told to be successful since the day we're born, basically. We have much more respect for successful people. We look up to them. Look at how we got the president that we have. And so I think it's important to share those stories, because it does affect people, and they produce empathy. And because right now, and for a very long time, we dehumanize people in poverty to the point where we don't feel any compassion or empathy for them. And I think we do that as a defense mechanism, because, and point to all the bad decisions that they've made to get them there. And we do that out of fear, because the more bad decisions that they have made and the more they have done to put themselves in that position, then the less likely we'll ever be there too. And we don't feel the need to help them, because why should we help someone who brought it on themselves? But the government shutdown situation has brought out all these narratives of not being able to buy food, and people realizing how close that situation could be for anybody. They're your neighbors, they're your relatives. It's not just this like invisible population that we picture sitting on a couch eating bonbons all day. With the welfare queen, and we have an image of poverty in our heads that's usually people of color, and it's usually, living in really downtrodden places, and when really it can touch you at any moment. With the healthcare system the way that we have it, and person running the government the way that he is, it's scary out there. And so I feel kind of encouraged by listening to those stories. And I just hope that more and more and more of them come out from, you know, all walks of life in adverse situations, because it seems like people are finally listening. So
I think the myth that hard work gets you ahead is what really is being exposed, and as we look at the gap between rich and poor, as it continues to grow, more and more people are more vulnerable. And I don't think that the stories of poverty are, of being stuck in poverty is something that people, I think many Americans don't want to accept. Like, this is not who we are. We can overcome this, and I think you say in your book, the American dream is not available to most people.
yeah, definitely. Well, and then someone like me, like I grew up in the suburbs. You know, my parents were together until I was 20-some. Like I did not grow up in systemic poverty or anything like that, and so I wrote a very privileged book in that place, like, or in that sense, or I wrote from a privileged place because I had hope that I was going to get out of it, or that I wouldn't say entitled to, but I just instinctively somehow knew that this wasn't the end for me. And I people who live in systemic poverty for generations, they don't have that belief, and their lives are just as important, you know, like they should have as much hope as any other person does.
So I wonder if poverty is known for kind of trapping people in that wealth growth is often not linear, it's exponential, right? So the more you have, the easier it is to grow more, and it works in the inverse direction, of course. The more poor you are, the harder it is to grow. I wonder if the welfare programs that you were involved with personally, and ignoring the data wherever it may be, but if you felt that they helped you get out of poverty, or kept you in, or some gray area in between.
The question was if the government assistance programs helped me get out of poverty. I think they did. A huge thing that happened for me was getting a low-income housing apartment. It was a place that I could live in forever, and it didn't matter if my income went up and I no longer would qualify for it. There was no recertification process. And the rent stayed the same, and it was only $430 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment with a washer and dryer. And once that happened, once I wasn't worried about losing my housing or not being able to afford housing or anything like that, I was really able to focus on work a lot more. Then again, you know, I was freelance writing while nursing a baby at the time. And so that was also very difficult, but it took one thing that I didn't have to stress over, and it's an enormous amount of stress when you're housing insecure. And you know, what little amount I got in food benefits was helpful, because I don't even know how we would have eaten most of the time. And both of my daughters had Medicaid for a while, and I didn't have to worry about paying for any of those costs. Like I never had it, but I mean, or I did when I was pregnant, but that was it. But I suffered greatly from that. Like I could have used medical attention a lot, or therapy, or you know, a lot of things that I have now that I recognize, like, wow, that really would have been helpful at that time. So I think the housing assistance was probably the biggest thing that helped me.
Another thing that I saw in your book that I think is something that was in you that many people who live in poverty particularly systemic poverty have is that at one point you recognize I'm just on a wheel, I'm going nowhere, I can't get ahead, and you were willing to take a risk. You took out the student loan and you made the move, not knowing where it was going to get you, but to finish your education. And I think that, speaks to who you are. Women tend to be more have more willingness to take risk, particularly when it comes to taking care of their kids. But that's also part of the getting trapped, is that you may not get the subsidized housing, and at some point you just don't see how you can ever get off, and that traps many people.
Well, it traps your frame of mind too.
Were you that? Yeah.
I didn't save money. I didn't, because what was I saving for? I only saw my life as this, and imagining the future was unbearable sometimes. Like, I didn't even want to imagine still being in that place in 5 or 10 years from now. And that sucks. I mean, it was a really hard life that I was living, and so when I did get this extra $10, I immediately bought a treat for my kid, or I bought, a special chocolate bar or something for me, or because it was that like momentary joy that I got when, saving just, it was just useless, because I'd save up $50 and then my car would break down. And even though I had that $50, that was my savings. And it just, like, this whole term of having a savings account was ridiculous. And in some states, you're only allowed to have $1,000 in a savings account if you're on food stamps. And when you're trying to save up for a first, last, and deposit on an apartment or a house, like, that's well over $1,000. So I was kind of told that it was worthless anyways.
Wow. Yeah, we'll make this our last question.
Oh, geez. Well,
Unless we want to stay longer, I'll leave that up to you all.
you mentioned Medicaid and healthcare. So, of all the social systems that we've talked about here tonight, one of them we haven't talked about is healthcare. And with jobs like domestic worker, as you were, you're not going to get that kind of benefit. So can you just describe, and maybe you came in through the, I don't know your timeline, the Obamacare period. Did you get any benefit from that at all, or could you see your way to that at all? And then I also want to ask you where you lived in Alaska.
I'll answer that one first because it's easy. I lived in Alaska, both in Anchorage and Fairbanks, and I actually have friends who I knew in Alaska here, who I haven't seen in a really long time. So I'm really stoked. So the healthcare question, I always made too much for Medicaid. The Medicaid cutoff is ridiculously, I think it's like $250 a month. It's incredibly low. And so I personally never qualified. And then with the Obamacare stuff, I think there was something to do with, because I was a freelancer, it was really hard to prove that I was working and how much, and you have to present paychecks, and it just felt like too much work, and I had never had health insurance, so I didn't really, I didn't really worry about it, I guess. But I do have health insurance now. I pay just for me and my youngest daughter, because Mia's dad covers hers. I pay almost $600 a month with a $8,800 deductible or something like that. And we're all in therapy right now, and since I'm paying like $1,000 a month on top of that just for therapy. And all of that just doesn't make any sense to me. But also, like, when I worked as a maid, I struggled a lot with a condition called scoliosis. I mean, I still do, but like my whole right arm would go numb on days where I had to scrub really hard. was in enormous amounts of pain and, you know, took way more ibuprofen than I think you should take. And so there was that part of it. Just like my job was incredibly physically taxing and draining, and you know, I couldn't go to the doctor. And if I did, you know, I'd get a bill for $200, and like, how am I gonna pay this? So, so does that answer your question? I mean,
Sort of reinforces what I thought, but okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to abruptly end, so let's try one more. Anybody else have one more? Please.
I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today, and she cleans houses. She's an older woman. She raised a son as a single mom, cleaning houses. And I was telling her about you, and her eyes. She was like, "How did she learn to write? How did she learn how to tell her story?" So I'd love to hear a little bit about your life as a writer and how that came to be.
Okay. The question was, and full disclosure, that's a friend of mine too. So the question was, how did I get to the point of like writing a book? So I kept journals for a really long time, since I was 10 years old, and it was a daily habit. But I lost the ability to hold a pencil. The nerves from scoliosis got pinched, and I still can't really grip very well for very long. So my friends all told me I should start a blog. This was back in like 2009 or something, and I started this WordPress blog. I called it Still Life with Mia, and I felt like our life was so chaotic that all of these like really cool moments that I had with her were just going to be forgotten. So I forced myself as much as I could to, I would even set a timer just to write for 10 minutes a day. And a lot of the time something really beautiful came out of that, and I felt proud of it, and I posted it on Facebook and shared it with friends, and they commented or sent me emails or messages, and it was a way to connect with people and to not feel so alone all the time, because between cleaning houses and going to school online and taking care of a kid and not having any money to go out, like, I was alone. And I was yearning for connection with people, and that was a way to do it. When I moved to Missoula, I submitted to a local magazine this little tiny blurb that I wrote like in the middle of the night, and they published it. And I stared at my name in print, and my immediate thought was like, I wonder if someone else would publish something that like I actually tried. And so I kind of feel like I was maybe on to something. And at the time I was in a degree program for sociology, because I wanted to be an advocate for domestic violence survivors. And I thought, well, maybe I can reach more people and help more people with my writing. And so I switched to an English major and just kind of decided to go for it. And it's funny, a professor at the college, I was telling him about like not knowing if I should do this or not, and he said, well, the country's so messed up right now, you might as well just do what you want. That helped. But when I graduated college, I graduated with $50,000 in student loan debt. And I decided very stubbornly to make all of that debt worth it. And so I started freelancing, not really knowing what to do, and just took any job that included messing around with words in some way, like, internet content. I filled content calendars for the local events page, like anything I could find. And that included sometimes working on personal essays that I'd worked on in college and pitching them to people. And that was how the Vox article came about. The Vox article that went viral was my first big publication, and that I got paid I got paid $500 for that, and like that was the most money that I ever thought I would ever see at one time ever. And but after that, every time I pitched an editor, I was the woman behind the house cleaning piece, and she's like, "Oh yes, we definitely." And so all of those bottles that I was throwing out started coming back with yeses.
So what's your next project?
Well, I always laugh at that question because it feels like I'm holding a newborn baby and they're asking me, like,
Are you having
"So when do you have another one?" It always feels a little masochistic, but no, I can't wait to get into freelancing. I'm hoping to do more advocacy work. It's looking like I'm going to be speaking a lot, which terrifies me because this is like my nightmare. And
Mine too, by the way.
and I mean, I have plans for another book, but it feels very far away at this point. But I miss freelancing a lot, so it just requires paying very close attention to the news, and it's just with everything going on, I can't get into it as much as I want to, where I get to that really angry place and have to write like an op-ed for somebody. But I would also like to be the mentor that I had through like community change or the EHRP, and I would love to have like a team of writing fellows that I work with and help them publish their stories too. So I usually have about 3 jobs going at once, so I stay busy.
Well, you're certainly an inspiration to writers, to women, to people in poverty. Yeah. Moms, yeah. I would love to hear all about your girls, but we can do it offline.
30 seconds about Girl 2?
Oh, yeah, so Coraline came about in a way that I knew that I was going to be on my own with her, and I decided to do it because it sounded kind of cool to be able to do everything on my own, just after everything that I'd been through with Mia's dad. But I was severely overestimating my abilities. Having a kid on your own, like all the pregnancy, all the birth, all the like after stuff, and now even is so hard. But she is the most, she's just like a ball of sunshine. Like, I don't know how she came out of me. But she is just this cute, like really snuggly, like wonderful kid. And, you know, it was hard, but it's been worth it. And Mia puts up with